This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The death toll rises as violence and looting spreads in South Africa. More than 40 people killed in spiraling unrest triggered by the jailing of the country's former president. Nigerian authorities warn Lagos may face a third wave of COVID-19 infections. And Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is expected to form a government in September after his Prosperity Party's recent polls victory. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Hannah Vivier with the day's business headlines. Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business later on in the program. South Africa's mining production jumps 22% year-on-year in May. And Kenya's horticulture earnings dropped $58 million in the first half of the year. I'll have those stories and more later on in the program, but for now, here's your news and current affairs with Beatrice.
Hannah, thank you. We begin in South Africa, where the imprisonment of Jacob Zuma has left President Cyril Ramaphosa facing both economic and political challenges. Zuma's arrest has widened divisions in the ruling ANC, with several members remaining loyal to the former president. The days of social unrest have affected an economy already hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. As Zuma continues efforts to appeal his imprisonment, widespread violence is expected to continue. Here's Ashta Tal with more.
When President Cyril Ramaphosa first came into office, he pledged to tackle corruption and improve the country's economy. The widespread unrest following the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma has put both pledges to the test.
Property has been vandalized and destroyed. Shops have been looted. Law-abiding citizens have been threatened and intimidated. Workers are scared that they may not be able to return to work.
The protest started in the eastern province of KwaZulu-Natal. Zuma is a native of the province where he currently resides. Since then, stores and malls have been looted. Trade routes have been disrupted, including the N3, a major highway linking to Durban's biggest port. The country's COVID-19 immunizations have also been hit hard. COVID-19 vaccination sites in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces were forced to close following attacks.
Shops have been looted and infrastructure has been destroyed. This means that our sick cannot get medication from pharmacies. Food does not reach supermarket shelves, and health workers cannot go to work. We will soon be facing a huge risk of food insecurity and medication insecurity in a few weeks. Our vaccination program has been severely disrupted just as it is gaining momentum.
Jacob Zuma has since started a 15-month jail term for contempt of court. The Constitutional Court handed the sentence after Zuma failed to appear before the Zondo Commission to answer questions. Addressing the court virtually, his counsel pushed for the court to rescind Zuma's jail term.
The starting point for us is who shall guard the guardians. We say that because this matter involves, first and foremost, the proposition that it is the Constitutional Court itself that may have exceeded the bounds of the Constitution.
But despite the brazen contempt because he has been told by this court to attend the commission as chaired by Justice Sondo. Despite that brazen contempt, which is persisted with in these papers, Mr. Zuma does not want to take punishment either.
Police have said protests intensified as Zuma challenged his 15-month sentence. Indeed, there is division both in the streets of South Africa and in the ruling African National Congress Party. Zuma still enjoys support from his former party, including that of Ace Magashule, who is currently suspended from his role as a Secretary General of the ANC as he faces a criminal case stemming from corruption charges. For his part, President Ramaphosa has pushed against what he labeled as opportunistic acts.
Some have characterized these actions as a form of political protest. This violence may indeed have its roots in the pronouncements and activities of individuals with a political purpose and in expressions of frustration and anger. At the beginning of this unrest, there may have been some people who sought to agitate for violence and disorder along ethnic lines. We know that the majority of our people have, out of principle, refused to be mobilized along these ethnic lines. However, what we are witnessing now are opportunistic acts of criminality with groups of people instigating chaos merely as a cover for looting and theft.
The Constitutional Court will now rule on whether to rescind Zuma's jail term. Asatal, CGTN.
Well, earlier we spoke to Angelo Coppola in Johannesburg on the latest developments.
In Gauteng, Beatrice, we see 19 people now reported dead, including 10 people caught in a stampede in a looting spree in a shopping mall in Soweto earlier today. In KwaZulu-Natal, the death toll is sitting at around 26 people who have been reported dead. Meanwhile, some 400 people have been arrested in Gauteng and 117 KZN in KwaZulu-Natal. The Western Cape is apparently calm but on high alert, and the same goes for the Eastern Cape. The Premier in Limpopo claimed that his province wasn't being affected by violence, but attempts have been made to loot a mall and burn a truck. Meanwhile, the M2 main arterial highway around Johannesburg is now open after it was blockaded with rocks and stones and burning tyres earlier today. There was some protest action there. The N3 is still closed in the Pietermaritzburg area. Meanwhile, in parts of Johannesburg, it resembles a war zone. Areas in around Alexandra and Soweto are still volatile, with widespread looting the order of the day there. Community radio stations in Alex have also been ransacked and looted of all their equipment, and those community radio stations are off air. The streets around the Alex shopping centre are completely chaotic. As far as the security cluster ministers are concerned, there's no need for a state of emergency to be declared just yet. That's according to a briefing that we listened to this morning. During that briefing, we also heard that some 2,700 troops had been deployed. Commentators are asking why only 2,700 when 70,000 were deployed during the hard lockdown in March last year. So there's lots of unhappiness there. We understand that there are daily meetings happening between the different security ministers, that's military, police and state security. Apparently they're working together, they're using intelligence to get hold of perpetrators. They're also watching social media to look for instigators to check if they're trying to spread unrest in the country, so that's continuing. That instigator move to watch the social media platforms is a big deal because we've seen some instigation happening. The Minister, in fact, of Defence, no, that was Minister of Police, was saying that he's got 12 names of people that they're watching carefully. So it seems like the army, the state security forces and the police are trying to get on top of things. We'll have to see how that plays out in the coming days, though.
Authorities in the Nigerian commercial capital Lagos say the city faces a potential third wave of COVID-19 infections following a gradual rise in new cases there. The news comes after the Nigerian Center for Disease Control recently confirmed the country's first case of the Delta variant of the virus. Here is CGTN's Deji Badmos with more on that story.
Lagos is the epicenter of Nigeria's COVID-19 pandemic, but the city has managed to bring the situation effectively under control, with the number of cases dropping significantly and some isolation centers even shutting down. But in recent days, the city has seen a spike in the number of cases, which is why authorities have warned of a potential third wave. Now, COVID-19 vaccination is still going on in the state, but the numbers are still low. Only about 1% of the population has so far been vaccinated. The government says it needs to vaccinate 60% of the city's population of over 20 million people in order to achieve herd immunity. But the vaccines to achieve that target are not there at the moment. On the Delta variant of the virus, which the NCDC recently announced it detected in a traveler to Nigeria, the government says it is facing a growing problem of inbound international travelers failing to comply with laid down COVID-19 related guidelines. It says henceforth defaulters risk imprisonment. Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu says the government will get tough with air travelers arriving in the city from abroad who fail to comply with COVID-19 protocols. So far, only one case of the Delta variant has been identified in the country. The authorities are now keeping a closer watch to ensure the number does not go up. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
6,000 health workers on the island of Zanzibar have begun receiving their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. The government has confirmed that it has begun administering doses of the Sinovac vaccine from China. CGTN's Isaac Lucando has more.
These vaccines were originally imported by authorities in Zanzibar as part of a promise to assist citizens who wanted to embark on the annual Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. However, with host Saudi Arabia limiting pilgrims to only 60,000 of its own citizens this year, the decision was made to use the vaccines for health workers instead. The government of Zanzibar says it is carrying out the exercise in 2 phases, where a second phase will begin in 2 weeks. Authorities have not disclosed the number of doses imported or whether the vaccines have been purchased or given as aid from the Chinese government. Despite early opposition to vaccines and promoting herbal remedies instead, Zanzibar has signed up for the World Health Organization's COVAX initiative, where it expects to receive free vaccines. Like on the neighboring Tanzanian mainland, the Zanzibar government says that as a matter of policy, it will not force any of its citizens to take the vaccines. In February this year, Zanzibar's Vice President Saif Sharif Hamad died 3 weeks after confirming he had contracted COVID-19. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
We now turn to Uganda, where only 38% of vulnerable people have received the relief cash they were owed during the latest lockdown, which is nearly ending. The government had set aside $15 million in COVID relief funds for people whose livelihoods have been disrupted during the 42-day lockdown. Isabel Nakiria reports.
Stephen Kizito is disappointed that he's not received the $30 relief cash that was promised by the government. He's a taxi driver in Kampala and he's been out of work for 25 days now. Taxi drivers are one of the groups listed by the Ugandan government as vulnerable, and they should have received money by now. Stephen says the government should have used a simple system for the payouts instead of sending money through mobile phone accounts.
The government should have asked taxi or border stage managers to register all their members, because they know everyone who belongs to their group and how much is needed for the payments.
The Gender Ministry says it has so far made cash transfers to about 148,000 people out of the 500,000 it was to reach. The money is being transferred to mobile accounts of the individuals. In Uganda, only people with national identification cards are allowed to own mobile SIM cards, which means many people may miss out on the cash transfers.
The system, the way it is built, is robust. It does not accept duplication. It does a lot of cross-checking to make sure that the telephone being paid is genuine and correspond with the name.
Town clerks have now been asked to rectify their records before beneficiaries can access their money. The cash transfers were an intervention by the government to support people whose livelihoods have been disrupted by the 42 days lockdown. The lockdown was imposed on 18th June to try and contain infection rates that were overwhelming the health system. The health ministry now says cases are going down, but it's still unclear whether the lockdown will be eased. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, the global initiative to distribute coronavirus jabs to poorer countries has received a huge boost. The COVAX program sealed a deal to buy at least 110 million Sinovac and Sinopharm shots from China. The World Health Organization has hailed the agreement as it strives to increase vaccinations to limit the spread of COVID-19. Nokutula Shabalala has more.
The coronavirus pandemic has killed more than 4 million people globally since it first emerged in late 2019. Attempts to halt its spread have been hampered by its ability to mutate. The highly contagious Delta variant is now fueling a third wave in many parts of the world.
Last week marked the fourth consecutive week of increasing cases of COVID-19 globally, with increases recorded in all but one of WHO's 6 regions. And after 10 weeks of declines, deaths are increasing again. We continue to hear reports from all regions of the world about hospitals reaching capacity.
Vaccines are still seen as the best way to keep the public safe. But many poorer nations are still lagging far behind their richer counterparts in administering the jabs.
If we celebrate, in one sense, with people in the UK, in Europe, in a sense of having that ability at least to think they can come together based on some level of vaccination that underpins this, look at what the rest of the world is looking at. Hundreds of millions of people in the southern hemisphere, hundreds of millions of people in developing countries are looking on as their health systems collapse, and they're going, wow, they're having a lot of fun in Europe.
The global initiative to distribute coronavirus jabs to poorer countries has inked a deal with Chinese drug makers Sinopharm and Sinovac. They will provide up to 550 million COVID vaccines to the COVAX program. Sinovac confirmed the agreement in a statement. They will begin to make 110 million doses immediately available to participants of the COVAX facility.
And I'm sorry to say it, but if solidarity is not working, if there is one word that can explain it, I'm sorry to say this, but I think anybody can see that it's greed. And let's give it its name. And we're saying it again and again, and we need a listening ear.
The Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, which runs the global vaccine sharing scheme COVAX with the World Health Organization, has not provided details of which countries would receive the doses. But deliveries will start quickly because both vaccines have already been granted emergency use listing by the WHO. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has spoken to his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. Both leaders have hailed 10 years of stable relations, expecting to promote further ties. President Xi said China is ready to help Ukraine overcome their pandemic situation. Zelensky, for his part, thanks China's efforts to aid Ukraine in a timely manner and for playing an active role in the country's fight against COVID-19. China has been providing coronavirus vaccines to Ukraine since March. President Xi has also had a phone conversation with Turkish President Recep Erdogan. The two sides are willing to strengthen cooperation against the pandemic. He said China is ready to carry out in-depth vaccine cooperation with Turkey. President Xi also called on the two sides to adhere to respect each other's core concerns and enhance a strategic mutual trust. Erdogan said Turkey is willing to actively participate in the Belt and Road Initiative and has welcomed Chinese enterprises to invest in Turkey. Erdogan also thanked China for its support in the coronavirus fight. He said Turkey has been supporting and will continue to support the One China policy. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed expected to form a new government in September after his party's recent election victory. And the UN warns of a global food insecurity crisis as the pandemic year is marked by an increase in hunger worldwide.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party won the most seats in Ethiopia's parliamentary election held last month. He is expected to form a government in September. But what will be his priorities? And what are the expectations? What expectations do the citizens have? CGTN's Gerum Chala explores.
The National Electoral Board of Ethiopia has already declared Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party the winner of the 6th general elections of the nation. The party won 410 out of the 436 seats of parliament. People now expect the elected leadership to deliver on all fronts, including peace, economic growth, education, and more.
As the youth of the nation, we support Prosperity Party 100% and would like to see all kinds of changes for the party, especially in making Ethiopia a prosperous nation in Africa and the world. We expect them to finish the construction of our grand dam and generate power. I hope we will maintain unity.
What we expect from the Prosperity Party is addressing the skyrocketing prices on everyday items. People are being seriously affected by the ever-soaring prices. We elected a party believing that it will address all these issues.
I want the winning party to look at the youth of this country. Most of us are unemployed, and we want to change that status as soon as possible.
Over the next 5 years, Abiy's party has already set up plans to transform the nation. What is known as homegrown economic reform is set to take the country's economy to the next level by focusing on the mining, agriculture, industrial sectors, as well as the energy sector. This is, of course, alongside the Prime Minister's Green Legacy initiative of planting billions of tree seedlings every year. But the nation also prides itself for holding what the authorities have called the first free and fair election after decades of failed polls. The head of the Ethiopian National Electoral Board says the nation has achieved the formation of an independent electoral institution.
Above and beyond everything, all of our stakeholders have learnt a lot because they have passed through this election process with us. They have learned how to accept our decisions, even if they were not convinced. There were no shortcuts to this. This is how we are supposed to build an independent institution for the nation. Many things were new to us, but all is now behind us, and I would like to acknowledge the efforts of stakeholders for working with us and walking the talk with us for the country to see free and fair elections.
Still, an opposition boycott, the war in northern region of Tigray, ethnic violence and logistical challenge in some areas overshadowed the election. Voting did not take place in 3 of Ethiopia's 10 regions. The Electoral Board says it will stage elections in the remaining areas next September. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
A new United Nations Food Security Assessment report says that 1 in every 3 people globally faced hunger in 2020. The report also reflects a sharp rise in the number of people starving globally. The UN officials attributed the crisis to the coronavirus pandemic, conflict and climate change. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has more on that.
The report says the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, conflict and climate change have contributed to increased food insecurity worldwide. United Nations officials told reporters that even though the pandemic caused economic recessions globally, hunger was still a problem even before the outbreak.
One of the things that this report does is combine the different drivers. No? So we start with the typical drivers that we have been analyzing, which is conflict, climate extremes and variability, and economic downturns and slowdowns. And we see how many of those happen at the same time. And in the region you are talking normally will be more than one or more than two of those drivers happening simultaneously. And that's where the challenge is bigger because it exacerbates even more the conditions.
The most affected regions include Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. According to the index, Asia has the highest number of affected people, with 418 million undernourished people, followed by Africa with 282 million people facing food insecurity. Both Latin America and the Caribbean have 60 million people affected in their regions.
While we are saving lives, we must invest in changing people's lives and in minimizing conflict. I think there is this need for political will, this political commitment, like the SG's call for ceasefire, but even more so to make sure that we kind of reduce some of these conflicts so that needs can actually come down.
The statistics reveal that children have suffered severe abnormalities due to lack of enough food and a proper diet. Malnutrition has subjected them to stunted growth, obesity and emaciation. A third of women within the reproductive age are also said to be anemic. The United Nations wants to end hunger across the world by 2030. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Africa has recorded an unprecedented rise in hunger, with an estimated 21% of the population being food insecure. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, over 280 million people affected by malnutrition are in Africa. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy reports.
The 2021 State of Food Security Report highlights a huge increase in hunger in Africa. In many parts of the continent, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to severe economic recession and hampered access to food.
This report shows that millions worldwide are now suffering from the devastating effects of COVID-19 on food systems.
The pandemic alone is not to blame for the food and nutrition crisis. As this year's report reminds us, conflicts, climate change, economic recessions are also driving food insecurity and malnutrition.
The report says that even before the pandemic, hunger was already spreading fast across much of Africa.
How can we accept that millions upon millions of people go hungry every day in a world that produces enough food to feed its entire population?
African nations affected by conflict could see worsening hunger unless action is taken now.
Again, it is us human beings that cause these conflicts for individual, national, or other egoistic reasons. This destroys livelihoods, colleagues, and it affects production, it affects supply chains, it affects governance, and it also leads to investors shying away from these countries, these regions, these areas. All of this has to stop if we want to really tackle all the root causes of hunger.
Now is the time for bold ideas, bold commitments, and bold leadership to do things that have never been done before. This is true for global health security and for transforming our food systems.
The report has urged policymakers to address poverty and structural inequalities by boosting the food value chain in poor communities. Other key recommendations include strengthening climate resilience and implementing social protection measures that will assist families so that they do not have to sell their meager assets in order to buy food. Daniel Arap-Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Dozens have been killed after a hospital fire in Iraq. Officials have put the death toll at 92, with more than 100 others injured. An investigation has now been launched into the deadly blaze at the hospital which was treating COVID-19 patients. Fu Shinri reports from Baghdad.
According to the information of local media outlet, the fire broke out at midnight and quickly spread to surrounding area in Hussein Teaching Hospital, Nasiriyah. That's the capital of the Kar province, South Iraq. Hussein Teaching Hospital is the designated COVID-19 medical treatment facility in the province, and this had brought immediate impact to local pandemic control. The neighboring Misan province has announced that it would receive the injured patients and provide proper treatment. The US, Iran, Egypt, and Jordan has expressed condolences in diplomatic channels. Iraqi President Barham Saleh said in a tweet that this tragic accident of Hussein Teaching Hospital is generated by long-term corruption and mismanagement that undermine the lives of Iraqi people. Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi demanded relative ministries to carry out a thorough investigation into the accident and decide the source of fire. This is not the first time a similar accident took place in Iraq. On April 24th, a COVID-19 designated hospital in Baghdad was also destroyed by fire initiated by an oxygen cylinder explosion. As the summer comes with temperature of over 45 degrees Celsius, lack of infrastructure and poor management will probably generate more risks in the coming days.
Well, let's now go to Hannah Vivier for a look at the business news. Hannah.
Thank you, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa's mining production jumps 22% year-on-year in May. And Kenya's horticulture earnings dropped $58 million in the first half of the year.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Welcome back. Time now for the business news. South Africa's mining production rose almost 22% year-on-year in May. That's according to preliminary data released by the country's stats agency on Tuesday. The data shows the largest contributions were made by platinum group metals, which went up 27%. Gold rose by almost 45%. Iron ore jumped 48%, while manganese ore climbed 40%. In the meantime, seasonally adjusted manufacturing production decreased by 5.6% in the 3 months ended May compared with the same period last year. Horticulture earnings in Kenya dropped by about $58 million in the first half of the year. The horticulture sector is a major foreign exchange earner in Kenya, alongside tea and diaspora remittances. However, in the last year, travel restrictions, regulatory changes, and closure of major international export markets due to the COVID-19 pandemic have affected the sector's performance. The Directorate of Horticultural Data shows that Kenya earned $713 million between January and June, down $771 million last year. This is the steepest decline in earnings for the industry in the last 5 years. The value of flowers dropped to around $463 million, with fruits declining from $115 million in the previous period to $111 million. The value of vegetables went up to $138 million. South Africa's national power utility Eskom has put forward a $10 billion plan to multilateral banks and agencies to help it move to renewable energy production. The development is significant as the utility generates more than 90% of South Africa's electricity using coal. With the details, here's CGTN's Angela Coppola.
Eskom has decided to make the transition as it hasn't been able to maintain the existing coal plants as well as complete new projects on time.
As we shut down our power plants, where are the opportunities and what are the opportunities to repower them with renewables, to repurpose them? But we're also looking at accelerating the renewables plan, looking at alternative options for energy security, for microgrids, for grid strengthening.
Climate change activists have been pushing the utility to move to sustainable energy sources to power the country's electricity grid.
If you look at a lot of the economic modeling and the systems analysis around what the best, most affordable, most job creating and reliable energy system is, it's a renewable energy future, one that's predominantly renewable, solar and wind with battery storage and the likes.
Not everyone agrees that renewables are the solution, specifically when it comes to dispatchable or baseload electricity.
Unless you've got a very large energy storage system, which hasn't been made to work commercially yet at the level we're looking at, or you've got some kind of backup power, renewables won't meet your need. If you just had PV, for example, PV can't meet the evening peak because the sun's not shining.
This isn't stopping Eskom from working with renewables in the short term as the coal-fired power stations reach their end of life. Finding the funding for the transition is a key focus.
The terms that we've been discussing with a lot of these financiers as well is very, very concessional, highly concessional loans, long payback periods, payment holidays, low interest rates. So that's what we're looking at. And on the side, in parallel, we're looking at the strategy to resolve the debt issues.
Eskom says it's got a plan to move from coal-fired power stations to renewable energy. The question now is how quickly it can do it and who's going to pay for it. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has moved closer to joining the East African community after an assessment by a verification team. The team spent 8 days in the eastern city of Goma and is expected to write a report about their findings on the DRC's suitability for admission to the regional bloc. Reporting from Kinshasa, here CGTN's Chris Ochamringa.
The East African Community's verification mission to the DRC was led by the regional bloc's Secretary General, Dr. Peter Mathuki. The team concluded its assessment of the DRC joining the community on July 4th and was tasked with establishing whether the DRC conforms with the criteria of admission of foreign countries to the community. Under the East African Community Treaty, all countries seeking to join the bloc must follow practices of good governance, the rule of law, democracy, and human rights. The DRC President, Felix Tshisekedi, hailed the progress made by the community in integrating his country. The verification mission is expected to write a report about its findings and submit it to the community's Council of Ministers. That report will then be given to the heads of state of the East African Community for a final decision on the DRC's admission to the regional bloc. If approved, the DRC will become the 7th member of the bloc. The other member states are Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. The DRC's entry into the community will ease trade with those countries and enable its citizens to move freely without requiring visas. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Over in West Africa, the Nigerian government is forecasting a budget size of $34 billion for 2022. Finance, Budget and National Planning Minister Zainab Ahmed disclosed this after the cabinet approved the 2022 to 2024 medium-term expenditure framework as well as a fiscal strategy paper, which are to underpin the country's budget for 2022 through to 2024. Reporting from Lagos, here's CGTN's Deji Badmos.
At $34 billion, the projected 2022 budget is 3% higher than the current budget. Also higher is the projected budget deficit, which is estimated at $13.7 billion, slightly above the threshold of 3% specified in the country's Fiscal Responsibility Act, FRA.
The FRA empowers Mr. President to exceed the threshold if, in his opinion, the nation faces national security threats, and it is our opinion and FEC agreed that we can exceed it.
Nigeria has been borrowing massively to fund its budget deficit for some years now. The government says it will still engage in new borrowings to finance the 2022 budget deficit.
The deficit is going to be financed by new foreign borrowing and domestic borrowing, both domestic and foreign, in the sum of 4.89 trillion, and privatization proceeds of 90.73 billion, and drawdowns from existing project-tied loans of 635 billion.
Nigeria's debt level has been a big talking point in the country, partly because of the huge chunk of money spent on servicing the debts. Many have also raised concerns about the country's debt-to-revenue ratio, which has been quite high.
I just want to state that the projected debt-to-revenue ratio in the report is 43%, which, of course, we know Nigerians all have concerns about. But the actual debt-to-revenue ratio in 2019 was 58%, so this is an improvement over the preceding year, over 2019. In 2020, the ratio was up to 85%, so 2022 is a significant improvement on 2020.
The pressure of the conversation here is not so much around budget deficit as we think of it. Many countries in the world, especially in view of global recovery, would to a large extent borrow more money, to a large extent run into budget deficit. All right, but what would set country A apart from country B would be what exactly are you investing those monies on?
Other key macro assumptions of the 2022 budget include crude oil benchmark price of $57 per barrel, crude oil production of 1.88 million barrels per day, inflation rate of 13%, exchange rate of 410 to the dollar, and a GDP growth rate of 4.20%. Some analysts, though, think some of the assumptions are not realistic.
Take, for instance, the exchange rate at 410. That's the official rate. All right. We all know to a large extent, very few businesses do engage or transact, if at all, the official rate. The fact that we're not being realistic on the nature of some other parameters would always affect the quality of our fiscal planning and the quality of our fiscal framework and dynamics around executing the fiscal policy in the sense.
The president has since sent the medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper to Parliament for consideration and passage. After lawmakers pass the documents, the 2022 budget will then be formally drafted and presented to the Parliament for vetting and approval. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, Egypt has welcomed Russia's decision to lift the ban on charter flights to and from Egypt. This follows a presidential decree issued by the Kremlin. The ban came into effect back in 2015 after the crash of a Russian passenger plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, which killed all on board and was presumed to be an act of terrorism. With the details, here's CGTN's Yasser Kim.
Egypt is bracing for the influx of Russian travelers. Russia had continuously postponed the return of its tourists to the North African nation since its passenger jet crash over Sinai in 2015. Egyptian authorities have been working hard on improving security measures since that fateful day.
Egypt had to meet a lot of requirements, so it firstly started from this national security of Egypt, and besides as well, like protecting all the tourists worldwide coming to Egypt. So the government had to escalate it up and to upgrade all their security infrastructure across all the aircrafts, and as well on the at each of the port or each of the airports, dealing with all the nationalities. There was involvement from different institutions in a global wise, ensuring that all the standard up to the most, according to all the different benchmarks from international airport, has been met in order to ensure the safest and the most efficient security systems are in place within the Egyptian government.
Before the flight ban in 2015, more than 3 million Russians visited Egypt per year, the highest of any nationality. Goldman Sachs estimates Russian tourism could pump $3 billion of badly needed hard currency into the economy. That's nearly as much as total tourism revenue for 2020. The tourism industry has always been a top hard currency earner for the state budget and employs millions of people. That's why the North African country had to seek alternatives during the absence of foreign visitors to keep the sector afloat.
This was Egypt's strategy since 2015. They tried to firstly to meet the requirement of the Russian government, and beside as well to try to open different source market, of which Egypt has started like approaching like the different Western countries of Europe. Indeed, as well, we started like focusing a lot on the Arab countries and the neighbor countries, and encouraging the Arabian, which started to represent around 30%, between 25 to 30% from the total arrivals are coming from the Arab region. And in addition, after COVID-19, there was different strategies, starting from the staycations or promoting Egypt for the Egyptians, creating new different type of products as well, creating and opening new destinations.
The government is forecasting 1 million Russian visitors before the end of the year, pushing tourism revenue up to $9 billion from $4 billion in 2020. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
China's state-owned enterprises have shown record-breaking performance in the first half of 2021. That's according to State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission of the State Council. In the past 6 months, these firms realized over 17 trillion yuan in operating revenues. Net profit exceeded 1 trillion yuan for the first time ever, at a 2-year average growth rate of over 20%. The regulator says the strong showing is thanks to the deepening government's 3-year action plan for SOE reform in China. Well, that's all the business news we have for you for now, but coming up on Global Business, Ghana is looking to pilot its central bank digital currency in 2 months' time. Officials from the country's apex bank say the introduction of the currency is crucial, especially following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be analyzing the implications of this move and much more at the top of the hour. But for now, let's take a look at what else is coming up on Africa Live with Beatrice.
Hannah, thank you. Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. South Africa aims to surpass Rio 2016 medal count at the Tokyo 2020 Games.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
South Africa's Olympic team is looking to improve on their medal haul from the Rio Games, despite the team's preparations being hugely disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic in the last 1 year. The Rainbow Nation is still optimistic they will challenge for more medals at this year's sporting showpiece in Tokyo. CGTN's CS Duplessis tells us more.
Team South Africa certainly look the part with their stylish new kit sponsor, but looking good doesn't always produce results. That comes from preparation, execution, and big match temperament. The 250-member team definitely possesses ample amounts of BMT, and that's why the SASCOC president is confident of medals in Tokyo.
Look at Akani Sambine's results in the 100 meters. So we are pinning our hopes on those athletes to come through. We're very disappointed with Casta, of course, but we know in our hearts that our athletes in the swimming pool and on the athletics track and even in the rowing stand a chance, and the rugby stand a chance of winning, and our thoughts and our pride and our passions behind them.
The mostly vaccinated team will be subjected to several tests before departing, but they'll all be eager to get to Tokyo and represent the Rainbow Nation with pride after a frustrating 12-month delay.
You know, it seems like it helped many of people to kind of reset and refocus. So I think we're in for great games. Unfortunately, we won't have spectators, but we are in the middle of a pandemic, so, that's understandable.
All eyes will be on the reigning 400-meter champion Wade van Niekerk, who has had his fair share of ups and downs since blasting his way to a new world record, to see if he can indeed defend his title.
I think he's going to be a little undercooked in race preparation, but you never count Wade out. I think the guy's got a mental ability to rock up on the day and produce. He will hurt himself to get what he wants. He's not afraid to do that. We'll see him in the final, and then he's also got that white line mentality. He steps on that track and he's just going to absolutely push his body to the limit.
And without the likes of medal winners from 2016 like Caster Semenya and Livo Manyonga, as well as surfing star Geordie Smith, it'll be up to the usual suspects to bring back the medals.
There are the usual suspects like the Wade van Niekerk. You know, he's battling with injuries a bit, but you'll never write him off. You've got a Connie Sambine, he's going to his second Olympics. Then you've got Chad Leclerc. I mean, it seems like he's kind of heading towards the last bit of his career. But he's one of those kind of classy kind of people that can produce the goods.
South Africa's best ever medal tally was achieved on 3 occasions: in Antwerp in 1920, Helsinki in 1952 and in 2016 in Rio, where the team claimed a total of 10. Expectations are high to surpass the previous best haul, and with motivation in abundance heading into Tokyo, there's every chance the team from the Rainbow Nation could indeed claim several medals well into the double figures. CS du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Kenyan Olympics team continues to jet out in batches, and the latest group to leave for Japan are the sprinters. The national women's 400 meters record holder Helen Siombua, together with speed stars Ferdinand Omanyala and Mark Otieno, will be joining with the team already in Kurume City ahead of their pre-Olympic camp in Japan. Omanyala set a 100 meters national record of 10.02 seconds, followed by Mark Otieno's 10.05 seconds at their last attempt to qualify for the Olympic Games earlier this month. Kenya is known for medal and long-distance running, where they dominate from the 800 meters to the marathons. The sprinters are now turning heads with each performance on the track and have promised to challenge for podium places in Tokyo.
I'm so excited. I didn't train today, so my coach knew. So we are really looking forward to reach at Kurume and hopefully just work in the next 3 weeks for the Olympics. My message to Kenya is that still God is in control and God will come at the right time. So I'm looking forward to go to the Olympics and to reach there safely, and just to tell them just to continue to pray for us.
I'm feeling great. It's been a journey and now it's becoming real. Going to Japan for the Olympic Games, now it's real because now we're going to the airport, you're flying out, going to show the world what Kenyans are made of in sprints. I feel fast, I feel strong. So what I can tell Kenyans just to glue themselves on the TV and wait for some miracles ahead.
The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach has praised Tokyo 2020's efforts in preparing for a secure and safe games.